Well, welcome everybody to this month's Bold Calling. This month we're talking about how to unclog your inbound pipeline. We're very happy you're joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We love questions, so go ahead at any point if you have any questions at all for questions. We love them. Use the Q&A portal at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Submit them, and we'll get to as many as we can. At the end of the session. The recording will be sent out to everybody by end of day today, I hope. If not, it'll be Monday, so don't worry. And then where are you in the world? Let us know in the chat. We love to see where people are calling in from and know where you are. So that's great. Oh gosh, I'm going to murder it now. And I asked. So then Pete...
in a good way,
right?
Kazanjy.
Kazanjy.
Yeah, just like the what do we say? Pronounce it like a Southern Californian, as flat as possible. Kazanjy.
Kazanjy, thank you so much. Pete is a serial entrepreneur. He's written books. He's founder of Modern Sales Pros. He's been on so many sales teams. So we're so excited to have him here with us today. Yes. And from the Orum side, we have Colin, who is our VP of Sales, who also has tons of sales experience. So we're really excited that you guys are here to share with us all your expertise and knowledge. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass
that was Colin's headshot from his acting career, obviously.
That's right. That's my acting career headshot. So there you go. That's that we send out to the agencies.
Fantastic. I'll pass it off to you guys to get going. So thanks so much for being here.
Ready to talk about some inbound stuff? I'm pumped.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So Pete, we're really excited to have you here for our Bold Calling session here. I know we've got a few hot topics we want to hit on today. So for folks in the room, right, how to identify and act on warm leads faster, right, is a hot topic. Of course, some ideas around form fills and how to sequence for events and optimize response rates and so much more. So excited to dive in here, Pete. I know you are a domain wealth of knowledge here. You've deployed so many technologies, so many processes, obviously being the godfather of modern sales pros. You've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't work anecdotally and from firsthand. So really excited to dive in with you today, on this topic. Well,
I think the big thing, I've been an Orum fan for a long time. And, I think in general, thoughtful sales automation, right? Thoughtful sales engagement automation is always something that's been very top of mind for me. Way back in the day at my last software company, TalentBin. So I run a software company called Atrium. We make what we call data-driven sales management software. It's software that helps sales organizations measure and manage and improve rep behavior and performance using data. And but my prior organization was a recruiting software company called TalentBin, and this that's where I went from being a business generalist founder to our first sales rep, sales manager, and then sales leader. And that's where I started kind of getting cozy with the concept of sales organizations being revenue factories, and how you could optimize and also automate, right, different kind of parts of the revenue factory or assembly line, if you will, right? And it's so funny, back in 2011, we had this is before Outreach or SalesLoft or even Yesware barely existed. We kind of kludged together our own sales automation using this software called InsideSales.com that was an inbound response dialer. Their first product was called Rapid Response or Inbound Response or Instant Response or something like that. But the point was that you just made it so when somebody would raise their hand, a hand raiser, you could call them very quickly within the next 30 seconds or minute or whatever. And then we also kludged together some email stuff as well. And so then the Outreaches and the SalesLofts and the whatever came around and made outbound email way more efficient, right, and automated. But calling always was really tough in that regard, because calling historically has been very laborious, because you gotta dial, and even if you're not dialing like this or dialing like this or whatever, even if you're click to calling, you're listening to the dial tones, right? You're navigating, call trees, all that sort of stuff. And so I think the problem is that like a lot of organizations didn't invest as much in calling as they should have, even though like live conversations are just like the way that you like move prospects along, right? Like they're like, we're in the business of like taking people's brains and like moving them towards realization that they need our product. And like you can't do that any better than like a live synchronous conversation. Which is why so much selling is done over Zoom. And of course, like live conversations are like micro Zooms, right? But the problem is like, how do you get more of those going? And so this is something that, at Atrium, we do a really good job of inbound marketing. We have a bunch of great content. We do a bunch of great offers, things like that. And we just weren't calling enough on that. And then so when we started using Orum, we were able to figure out that like, oh man, because now we could automate a lot of that calling behavior such that our SDRs would only be having like, instead of sitting there like listening to dial tones all day long or like ringtones all day long, instead what they would be doing is having a lot more live conversations. And it totally changed our inbound motion in that regard. It's super awesome.
That's awesome, Pete, right? So like, you're setting up, you're looking at the whole kind of value chain of events of inbound, right? And then recognizing live conversations are the most valuable. And I'm sure within that speed to lead, right? How quickly can you get into a live conversation with somebody that is walking into your store, right? And seeing how you can help them. Are they qualified? And taking them on that journey ahead of the competition. I'm curious, within that, like maybe getting a little tactical for a moment, like how do you set that up, right? Like, I know you probably played a lot with form fills. You probably played a lot with like driving people in calls to action. How do we get to a point where like the phone becomes like a key part of that, like even to get their number and all of that? How do you think about that kind of chain of events?
Yeah, totally. So I think what I can do is I can kind of unpack how we kind of thought about this. Like I look at Orum as like a superpower for our SDR organization, because what it allowed, like if all of a sudden calling can be as efficient as emailing, and if you like, it like all of a sudden opens your eyes to a bunch of things that previously you might not have done. And I'll kind of give you some examples there. So like imagine like an inbound hand raiser sequence in like Outreach or Sales Loft or Groove or Apollo or whatever. Maybe maybe you have an initial call, right? You got to call them. Maybe you have a follow-up email, right? There's probably like a bump email, like this is a hand raiser, right? So like it's okay if we hump their leg, right? Like they asked for it, right? And
Sure.
and so like maybe it's a couple days like this, and then maybe we call them a couple days later, right? And then maybe we drop them a text or like find them on LinkedIn or whatever. And the reason why we don't like more heavily load calling in that sequence is because each call, like an automated email action, it doesn't take any time, right? But each call step would probably take like each manual call step would probably take like 5 minutes. Like 5 minutes, that's a lot. It's like, well, I mean, let's be honest, right? Like you call, ring, 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 like leave a voicemail, disposition the call. Oh, someone pinged me on Slack, like all that silly business, right? And so now, and then of course like ring, 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 and like even with like hand raises, your connect rate's gonna be like single digits, right? Single digit percentage points, right? So most of the time you're just like listening to ringtones and like leaving voicemails. So if you could parallelize that though, and like now all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's no, like this is a hand raiser, right? This is a hand raiser. They asked, right? There's no reason not to call them twice during the first day. There's no reason not to call them twice on the second day. There's no reason to call them twice on the third day. Now, maybe at that point it's like, okay, right? Like with all inbound leads, they have like a decay rate to them. So we don't want to keep doing that. But the point is that like, if they raise their hand, in the first couple, like in the first hour after they call or like they raise their hand, and then subsequent to that, there's no reason for us to not like, hey, like you raised your hand. And a good example of this with Atrium is we do a bunch of kind of like clever swag and like giveaways. Like I'm actually wearing one right now. Like we have these really fun sales nerd hoodies where we say, hey, like we'll send you a sales nerd hoodie if you're ICP and like you take a meeting with us. So people will raise their hand to get one of these. And like if they don't auto book, because we use Chili Piper for like auto booking, if they don't auto book, like cool, we're gonna like they owe us a meeting, we're gonna get them on the calendar, we're gonna call them for that. So then all of a sudden it's now like you could now it actually has changed our inbound, like the way that our inbound sequences are set up to have way more calling steps in them at the beginning of the like of that sequence. And it's fantastic, right? Because like, people Chili Piper and kind of like, Chili Piper, Calendly, I think Lean Data has like an auto booking functionality now. Like these are pretty common technologies, but like there's a lot of people who don't understand what's going on. Like they get a Chili Piper overlay, like what the hell is this? Close it. They're like, all right, well I filled the form, right? And so so it's still our responsibility. Like our terminology that we use internally for this is like they owe us a meeting. And so like in that situation, like we got to loop across the people who still owe us meetings, who were like they were form qualified and didn't book through Chili Piper. We still got to get them on the calendar. And so that, like, depending on the inbound programs that are going on, that could be anywhere between like 50, 100, 200 people at any given point in time. And so then like being able to loop across those, if you're doing that manually, like an SDR could only like an inbound SDR could only handle so many of those. If you have a parallel dialing solution in place, now all of a sudden that SDR can just be looping across all those people who owe us meetings and then nailing them to the calendar. And so that's been something that like it totally transformed what our inbound sequences look like to be like calling first, right? And then like, maybe the SDR doesn't get to maybe the SDR doesn't get to getting all the way through all their call tasks for the day because there's so many of them, again, because we loaded so many into but like it's kind of okay. And then we'll just like auto dismiss them such that then the automated emails go. And then the next day the SDR has a ton of call tasks lined up. And so like you can just sprint, like what you're like marketing works so hard to get these folks to raise their hands, right? And so now what we're doing is we're doing them justice and having way more live conversations with them. So like it totally changed how we actually set up our inbound sequences, and just makes it such that like we're getting so much more out of like the programs that we do around giveaways and like we actually don't do a lot of paid marketing like LinkedIn ads or Google ads or whatever. But like if you're paying $20 or like $30 for a qualified form fill or whatever, and they're not like getting on the calendar, you better call the hell out of them or else your CMO is going to be pissed at you, right?
You nailed it. Maximizing that marketing investment, and it really helps to strengthen that kind of connection, right? That bridge between sales and marketing, right? So the sales development team is enabled to easily follow up with all of those marketing leads. I'm curious, like, you mentioned a few steps there, right? So, you've got, it sounds like you've got some automation to get people on the calendar immediately. So are they going through a form fill, on your site, and then based upon their answers, does that unlock like a calendar booking immediately? Or are you kind of showing that calendar booking for everyone? Like, how do you kind of think about the order of operation there, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, for sure. Here, maybe I can share my screen. Maybe I can't share my screen. We'll see if I can or not. Yeah. So like, this is a good example of one of this is like one of our programs, right? Take a meeting, get a sales nerd hoodie. It turns out that like sales operations, sales leaders, et cetera, especially the folks who are into Atrium, they kind of fancy themselves as like sales nerds, right? So what they do is like, they'll go ahead and like, we'll go outbound with this form, we'll go outbound with this landing page. We'll do drops against our database, et cetera, et cetera. Someone will fill this out. We have qualification criteria here. Notice that phone number is required. We'll get back to that. We'll get back to that in a second here. But like, we'll ask for qualification criteria. How big is your sales organization? What CRM do you use? We only work with Salesforce, right? And then we want to qualify them. Like, so like we're not gonna, you're not the person we want to talk to if you're an AE, you're an SDR. Sorry, we love you, but like no. And so what'll happen is someone will fill this form, If they are qualified, so qualified for us is anything better than 11 to, all the way up through these guys right here. And they hit Salesforce, they'll get a Chili Piper overlay. Chili Piper will be like, hey, you should book a meeting, or essentially it'll be like, hey, wonderful, in order to get your hoodie, like go ahead and, book this meeting, etc. And I think like probably 50% of people will actually like end up booking that. I mean, calendar automation stuff is like really great because the alternative is like, great, someone will be in touch with you. It's just like, I mean, tons of fall off right there, right? But even in this situation, even if only 50% of people end up booking through Chili Piper or Calendly or whatever, like the other 50% don't, right? Again, if they're meeting those criteria. And so now what we want that, like we want the SDRs to go around like picking those people up and like nailing them to the calendar. And so that's what we already talked about. So I won't rehash that. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that phone number is required. And like Colin was like, yeah, my man, right? Because like oftentimes what ends up happening is marketers will get like afraid of asking for incremental fields on the form, like make them go like this. Right. Yeah. And so the problem is, and the reason why, and like what we want is we want people who are qualified. Like we don't want more like hay to find needles out of, right? Like we just want the needles, right? And a good another example is like, hey, look, asking for the phone number if we're not going to call it, blessed, like that's stupid, right? Like, oh, someone's like, oh, I don't know if I want this, if I want my phone number going in these guys' database. And it's like one of these things where if the SDR team's not going to call it because they don't have a dialing automation or a parallel dialing solution in place, cool, then maybe the juice is not worth the squeeze. But in this case, as I was kind of noting earlier, if you are call centric in your inbound motion, which we now are, right? We're like heavily call centric as the result of Orum, then yeah, we're going to require that because now the juice is worth the squeeze. So like when we get that phone number, we're going to call it 10 times, right? In order to get that like slammed on the calendar. And the reason why we're able to do that is because, our SDRs can do like 300 calls a day through Orum versus like 50 calls via, doing just like single threaded, like, click to call through sales engagement. So this is why I was saying earlier is like, as soon as you get like parallel dialing on the brain, right? As soon as you like, if you recognize that the most effective way of like moving a prospect's brain towards a live Zoom meeting is a synchronous, like I was joking earlier, like a micro Zoom, it is like a synchronous conversation where like we're having quick back and forth and there's like we're transmitting lots of information. If you get religion around that, but then historically, like, yeah, that was the thing, that is the most effective thing, but like, man, it's just so hard to get people on the phone. Now we have parallel dialing solutions that can make it such that instead of having 4 connects a day, now we can have like 30 connects a day or 40 connects a day. Great. The cost of that micro interaction, that micro synchronous conversation just dramatically went down. Now, all of a sudden you're like, great, let's sprinkle this everywhere. And so what that means is that has to go upstream to your landing pages as well, right? And so that's going to oftentimes will take some kind of convincing for a marketer to be like, hey, I don't know if I want to add this. It's like, cool. I promise you that if we go ahead and add, like if we add phone number here, we're going to get a lot more SAOs, right? Like, cool. We might lose some MQLs. I get it, right? Like we're going to, like the looky-loos may not want to put it, but if somebody's like down, like if they're in it to win it, they're going to put their number in it and we're going to nail into the calendar. Versus if they're in it to win it and we don't get their phone number, right? It's going to be a lot harder for us to nail it to the calendar. So your MQLs may go down, but your SAOs in aggregate are going to go up, right? And so that's a little bit of a different thought process for some marketers who are like, MQLs are going to go down if we put the phone number on there. It's okay. We're going to get, like, ultimately what we care about is revenue and pipeline, right?
100%. You want higher quality. You want converting MQLs, not just MQLs for the sake of MQL's sake, right? So
yeah, 100%.
It makes sense, right? And what I love is, earlier you were sharing that example, right? Like marketing would get frustrated with sales because, maybe a call step would come up and like you were talking about, it's ringing. Maybe the rep, gets a Slack message. Maybe they go get a cup of coffee. Maybe they forgot to disposition the call. That holds up the entire sequence, right?
Oh,
and
yeah,
then
totally.
marketing is like, wait, why aren't these event leads going through the sequence? Like this is under you're breaking the SLA here, and then reps start to just try and skip the step, and then marketing's like, what, just rip out the call step. Let's just have everything go into email.
We call it looping, right? Like you're just looping. We're just looping across, these leads, right? These MQLs until they get to a certain age, right? And so like, yeah, maybe they get like 2 calls a day, maybe they get 3 calls a day, like whatever. They're getting lots of calls, right? And because again, I actually wouldn't. Yeah, exactly. Like their hand, like, sorry, now that they can, and also their hand raisers, right? So like, we're not pissing anybody off here. Now, 5 calls in a day, maybe a little aggressive, right? But like, they're getting 2 or 3 calls, like that's fine. Like, did they get 1 call? Great. They get 3 calls? Okay, also great. They're getting calls, right? Now, I wouldn't front like an outbound calling expert. Like that's more you and like Aaron and other people on your team, like know way more about that. But I think one of the things that I love so much about Orum and inbound is that a lot of SDRs are just like not great at calling. They're not great on the phone. And the only way you get better at being on the phone is lots of repetitions, right? Like lots of push-ups. And so the problem is that like even doing outbound calling in a non-automated capacity, in a non-parallel capacity, 1, 2, 3 connects a day, right? Like you're just kind of sitting there like trepidatious, like, oh man, this is gonna happen this time, like psych yourself out. And even with inbound, like maybe you'll get like 4, 5, 6, 7 connects a day, right? But if you're in a situation where you're getting like 20 or 30 or 40 connects a day, like you just expect it. It's not a surprise, right? So like it's not a surprise, and you just get used to it. And so again, this is what I mean about like putting calling on the brain of your organization and just like infusing it. Because now all of a sudden, like not only do we infuse our inbound sequences with it, we infuse our landing pages with it, we're also infusing our organization with it. It's like, yeah, like what we do, like we're just very comfortable having conversations. In the case of Atrium, we're very comfortable having conversations around data-driven sales management, and our SDRs are good at talking about like, oh, like, cool. How do you measure and manage the performance of your sales team right now? Oh, we've got these like Tableau dashboards, and okay, well, a lot of times people find that it's pretty difficult for managers to end up consuming those or manipulate them. Does that ring a bell at all or whatever? Oh yeah, totally. And like most of the time they're broken, and it takes like 2 weeks for us to get anything changed by the data team. But like this is like a 24-year-old SDR having a great business conversation with a sales operations person or an AE manager or a director of sales, and like now they're just like fluent in that. And so like not only does that make them a more successful SDR for email as well, right? Sure. But it also like tees them up great for like when they're eventually going to become AEs again. And so just like putting calling in the water and just like making it expected, because the cost of calling has like the labor costs of calling has declined so dramatically thanks to the ability to parallelize it like through things like Orum. It just like has all sorts of rad benefits throughout the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I 100% agree, right? Repetition is the mother of learning, as we say here at Orum. And the more conversations, more at bats, the better your reps are at talking to people, just talking to all kinds of different people. And if you do view your inside sales, your sales development team as the bench for the rest of your organization, your customer facing roles, account executive, client success, putting them in an inbound position where they're getting those conversations, those at bats, it really builds up their muscles. You touched on a couple of things, and something I love that you do, Pete. I love a lot of things that you do, but you're big into gifting, and you mentioned you've got this 50% kind of just, rough math, 50% kind of people that actually go to the form fill and book the meeting, 50% do, 50% don't. I mean, that's great, right? I think you've got the psychology there of you're going to give them a gift, which is that psychology of reciprocity. And, something else that we view at Orum, and I know we preach this a lot to other organizations. I'm curious how you think about it is, even someone that books a meeting, how are you locking that down, right? Like,
oh, dude, totally. Yeah. The post, post, we have a sequence called post meeting booked, right? It's a PMB sequence, post meeting book sequence, right? We're like, you got to sell the meeting to begin with, and you got to sell the hold, right? Like you sell the set and you got to sell the hold, right? And so I think that's actually something I was going to comment on, is that one of the other things that we found too is like, not only are we putting more not only are we putting more like stage zeros on the calendar. So we create an opportunity as soon as the meeting is booked, because I want to have visibility there, but we only flip it to stage one after a meeting is held and they're qualified. So one, like your stage zeros will go up when you infuse calling into your inbound motion, your stage zeros will go up, right? Because all those people who owed you a meeting because they did an auto book or whatever, like now you're nailing them to the calendar because your SDRs are looping, right? One. Two, the hold rate goes up too, because typically the way that the meeting was booked wasn't asynchronously via email with like some faceless person.
Automation.
It was, it was a live call, right? Where you had like even if it was like a 4 or 5 minute conversation, right? Like you had a live call and like now like there's a relationship there, or they were like more convinced. And so that's something that we've also seen, is that like hold rates have gone up. And yeah, we do like the post meeting book stuff, like, hey, really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. These were the priorities that you had shared. But also just like, and then of course calling components in the post meeting book sequence, but also just like the fact that someone had a live conversation, they were sold on the meeting, right? They're like, yeah, actually, that is top of mind. I'm a CRO and I have 8 managers, and like, yeah, getting all 8 of my managers to manage in a consistent way by metric is something that keeps me up at night as a CRO. So yeah, I'm down. Thank you very much for the like Yeti cooler or whatever, because I'm a CRO and it's like, fancier offer for a fancier title or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, like that is something that's top of mind for me, right? Because it drives me nuts that like this manager over here is doing things one way and this manager over here, and I just think I need a consistent playbook for these folks. And I had a nice conversation with this bright young SDR who was able to have a relevant business conversation with me, because they have tons and tons and tons of repetitions of conversations, and like had a business conversation with me about that, and then got me on the calendar to talk with an account executive. And so the account executives are juiced up too, because not only do they hear that SDR is having really good business conversations, but B, they find that the people who show up they show up to the meeting and they're like primed, right? They're like more in it. They're like, why? It's not like, what am I here for again? Right. But it's like, hey, like, we're here to talk about, hey, like, I heard you can help me be like, facilitate consistent management across my managers. Like, I'm all ears. Let's go. Like, thanks for the hoodie, or thanks for the Yeti cooler or whatever. But like, actually, I'm really interested in that. Like, let's talk about that.
Yeah. You're able to emphasize the business acumen and increase your hold rate, because your team are having live conversations with the folks that are either booking through the automation, or the ones that might not have gone through the full calendar booking automation, right? You're capturing them through that loop, and you probably have a long tail of call tasks until you put them in sort of some cooling period and resequence them. So I love that. So you got a post meeting booking sequence, and then you're locking it down, just like if you're booking a meeting, booking a reservation at like a high-end restaurant, the host is calling you to ensure
you showing up.
Are you showing up? Because we're gonna give up the table, right? Like, and it's respect for both parties' time, right? It's like the account executive, we don't want to block time that they could be with someone else. And for that business executive, that CRO, that VP of revenue operations, whoever it is, like you mentioned, priming them with some of the agenda that they should be looking forward to, right? And maybe there's like a way to do a call between the calls, right? They booked a meeting, you've got that set meeting on the calendar, and investing time to actually call them, lock it down, and do a call between the call and see most areas of key interest. And of course, because they got the Yeti cooler too, right? That's awesome.
Yeah, well, no, only after they attend. Yeah, so the one thing I would actually call out on that front that's an additional piece that it's like there's the there's the hand raiser sequence, right? That's like call heavy to get them on the calendar. There's the post meeting book, and then the other thing is that like what you're doing is you're filling your database with these people who we call it kind of like proprietary intent, right? Like you're filling your database with people who like raise their hand at one point. Like maybe we didn't get a call on the calendar for them for whatever reason, you know, but like that then goes into this big, like you were saying, a cooling period or whatever, like maybe it goes into some like maturation sequence or whatever. But then you can always pick that back up, right? In a few months, like the same way that we have a resurrection process for all of our close loss opportunities. So like close loss opportunities, like they go into a cooling period and then they eventually go into a resurrection process where like 90 days later, SDRs are going to like, seek to rebook with them. You can do the same thing with someone who hand raised, who like went through an inbound sequence and didn't end up booking. Well, 60 days later or what have you, like, let's take another run at that, right? With some sort of offer, like, hey, you know what, like we never able to have a conversation with you, but we would love to really, get you your sales hoodie or whatever, like whatever it is, you know what I mean? And and again, like you can do that because I mean, this was something that like back in the day, a lot of the like SMS technology providers sought to do. So like the Hustles of the world or the Conversicas of the world or the what have you. It's just like, hey, look, like you should seek to engage the long tail of your MQLs that never booked in a scalable fashion, right? Like manually calling against them, kind of laborious, probably not a lot of like, juice probably not worth the squeeze. Great. Let's send a bunch of like automated, like email, no problem. We got marketing automation for that. SMS, oh, okay, cool. And that's like where a lot of those solutions kind of came up. But again, like SMS automation is just kind of like a noisier email automation. Whereas now if we can parallel dial across like, thousands of prior hand raisers and get folks to come out of that list, then like that's super powerful.
Yeah, these are folks that have opted in at some point. They've raised their hand and expressed interest, and they went through your sequence. And maybe I'll come back to like, I'm curious, like how many steps your typical qualified inbound hand raising sequence is before you put them in a cooling period. But with technology, with automation, you're able to get these live conversations, right? And cut through the noise and ensure that they're going through the loop properly to get them on the calendar there. I am curious. So like when you do get a hand raiser, right, they filled out that form fill on the website, like how many steps, how long are you typically putting them through like that first sequence before they go through some sort of loop?
Geez Louise.
Not to put you on the spot. Maybe it varies by campaign.
I think, no. I think in general, like our inbound sequences are like 2 weeks long, right? And like I think our inbounds, like it's actually kind of funny. I remember this was like 6 months ago or something, where I went out, I was like inspecting our sequences, and our inbound sequences, or at least were being used as outbound, or sorry, the inbound sequences were structured as outbound sequences, right? And what I mean by that is just like your like standard kind of like customized email on the first email, maybe a call, and then a LinkedIn Connect, and then like maybe a social touch, and then an automated email, and it like went over 2 weeks, and I was like, guys, this person raised their hand, right? Like they owe us a meeting. Like, what are we like? Why are we beating around the bush here, right? And I think now it's like 3 touches a day mixed with email and calling for the first week, and then it trails off to like 1 a day in the second week, and then they're done. I think that's kind of what it is right now.
Yeah, no, I love it, right? They submitted the form. It's like, we're not talking about the Agoji personalized first email and then outbound.
Yeah.
Like I told the team, pick up the phone and call them even before it hits this, you might have an automated trigger with your sequences. So for us, I'm like, guys, just call that. If you're not on a demo, you're not on a qualification call, just call them, if you can get them on the phone right there and then do it. Otherwise,
yeah, like they're in the mindset. I was talking with Henry Shook about this, so the CEO of Zoom Info. He was doing a presentation on their SDR organization at Zoom Info for a Modern Sales Pros virtual summit, and like they've implemented like sub 90 second speed to lead across like 400 SDRs, and it's just like it's just a machine, right? And I think the thing that people don't realize is it's like, oh, well, they raised their hand, so like they'll be interested in talking to me in an hour. It's like, no, they won't, right? Like they're in it right now. It's top of mind for them before they go and like jump into a meeting or jump into a series of meetings. Like now's the opportunity. And even if they auto booked, right? Like now's the opportunity to get it on the calendar, right? And be like, hey, cool, just noticed, awesome, glad you want your sales nerd hoodie or your Yeti cooler or fill in the blank, or you wanted to attend this webinar. That's really fantastic. I just noticed that the calendar invite didn't get on the the calendar, so just wanted to fix that really quickly. How's your Thursday look? Right, boom, done. Right. And like it's like they're in the same frame of mind where like, oh yeah, I just feel that, oh, I made a boo-boo and I dismissed that, like that chili piper overlay. Thank you for catching my boo-boo. I would have been sad. Right. Whereas I think a lot of the times SDRs are like, I don't know, like they didn't book on purpose. It's like, no, they didn't. They're just busy. They just forgot.
They're on the site. They filled out form enough to express interest, probably share some data there. And look, like these days, you've probably seen these filters in Gmail, and I think Microsoft has this as well. If the calendar trigger sends it to invite them to the calendar, it might not auto-populate on their calendar anymore unless they're a known person to you, right? So still calling to lock it down and ensure they've accepted the meeting invite, because they might miss that meeting book overlay. I think you mentioned chili piper, right? They might miss the chili piper overlay when they're booking a meeting. But also just in their inbox, the calendar invite might not show up on their calendar because of the new filtering that Google has, and Gmail has, right? So either way, calling to lock it down and ensure, hey, we saw you selected a time. We know, Google's not automatically populating these events. Want to ensure this time works. Also, what were you most interested in covering on that? Here's a typical agenda. What's most, interesting? Why even investigate this service at this time, right? So I love it. Pete.
Yeah, I like the it's almost like the post meeting. It's almost like the post meeting book sequence should like always have. It's just like a courtesy call. There's definitely like the call before the meet, like the day before the meeting, which is like, hey, let's make sure you show up. But it's almost like even a call after they immediately after they book, right? Just as a courtesy call. Hey, thank you for booking. We just wanted to do our diligence, make sure it got on the calendar. See, according to my records right here, we're on, Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. While I have you, what are your your biggest areas of interest when it comes to using metrics and data to improve the performance of your team? Oh, great. And and now they spill, now you're doing some lightweight discovery ahead of a call, et cetera, et cetera. You share that clip with the account executive, et cetera. Now they're more pumped, right? The prospect is more pumped. They're more likely to get on the call, et cetera, right?
Yeah, you nailed it. Pete. And I know you require phone numbers in your form fills. And earlier, I know you were sharing that, some people are like, oh my gosh, don't require the phone number. They might abandon the form fill or what have you. But what, Pete, what you were sharing before is you get higher converting MQLs with the people that are volunteering the number. I'm curious, within that number requirement, I'm sure people put a 555 number or some sort of fake number from time to time. How are you thinking about like enriching that, or how do you approach those just from a tactical perspective? If somebody's put like they've put a real valid business email, but maybe the phone number doesn't have the accurate details. How do you approach that step?
Yeah, I don't think we get that a ton. And I think it's probably because a lot of the stuff that we do is offer based. And so people are like, I want to make sure I get my sales nerd hoodie. I want to make sure I get my Yeti water bottle.
I want my Yeti cooler. Call me. I want it. I'll give you my address.
Yeah, pretty much. Right. And like, I think the thing with us is that like, Atrium's not cheap software, right? It's like big kid business software. So it's, it's not cheap. So we can do things like that. But I think a lot of people have that kind of same situation. I guess like in our case, we don't have a ton of that problem, because I think for the most part, like we're doing a good job of, I guess there's kind of like two things there. It's like, one, if someone's going to put a BS phone number in there, that's almost kind of like an indicator. It's like a DQ indicator a little bit, where like they're filling the form or they're not filling the form. And so ultimately what, like as salespeople, what we're seeking to do is like pull demand out of the world, right? That has a proclivity, and then move them along, right? I know that I know that Orum has its own kind of like phone number database in it. I think that like that kind of helps folks as well. But yeah, we just don't really run into that all that terribly much.
Yeah, no, that's a great position to be in, Pete. I think, right, like you're asking for the number, people are giving it to you, they want to meet with you. It creates even more qualified potential there. But if they do put, maybe they mistype the number, or they, put a fake number, you're able to leverage technologies to be able to filter out the failed bad numbers and pull in potential good direct dials for them. So you can still get them on the phone, right? That tech exists today, which is exciting.
The other thing I'll call out too regarding asking for phone numbers and the in the form and requiring it is, in addition to that, enabling call parallelization, it also makes it such that you can SMS people. And the outreaches and Salesloft, and I don't know if Apollo and Groove have this function. I imagine they probably do. But like using that as a mechanism, as well as part of your, as part of your inbound strategy, even just be like, hey, just want to make sure that we're in touch, right? Like, and it's almost kind of like one of those things where it's just like, hey, you gave us your phone number. We realize you gave us your phone number. We called you and we sent you a text message. So you probably should show up to the meeting, because guess what will happen if you don't, right? And so essentially,
we're going to keep dropping voicemails. We're going to keep texting, right? Actually, that's like some of the cute like voicemail scripts that we have for the inbound. Is the rep is like, hey, if unless you want me to keep leaving voicemails for you, I just want to get this call confirmed, for next Wednesday, like you booked, right? And it's exactly like you're hitting on, Pete. I think you got to be thoughtful and tactful with it, and you can play around with this.
It'd be funny though.
But you nailed it, right? Like in the form fill, they're giving you their direct line, their email, they're agreeing to be reached out by you, right? And when we're talking with texting, by the way, there are lots of regulations in this space. Pete and I are not lawyers, but we're talking about texting. There needs to be an opt-in, right? So, I would check with your marketing team that you have the opt-in language when everybody has to agree to a term when you're submitting a form fill. Just ensure that you're covering your bases with an SMS or to be reached out through those mediums of communication if you're unsure any gray area. And that way it is all good. So text inbound, I think the colder outbound is where most of the laws are covering. You can't mass cold outbound text. Text is very much regulated and protected. But the inbounds are good to go when you have proper guidance on your form fills there and protection. Yeah. What else, Pete? I know you've done a lot with the form fills. I know, asking for numbers. Is there any like form fill software maybe that you're seeing? I've started to see different innovations there. I know you mentioned Zoom Info earlier. Chuck, what have you seen works best? Like, are you having them, go through the Chili Piper flow first, then they fill out the form fill, or the form fill, it has to meet certain criteria, then Chili Piper shows up? Like,
Yeah,
what do
we
you
we
feel at this stage? Yeah.
I think it kind of depends on like what is what means qualified for you. So like use Atrium as an example. Like we only want to talk with you if you use Salesforce as your CRM. Okay. The problem is that like that information is not really observable on most people's websites. So like their marketing automation software is observable, like HubSpot or Marketo or Eloqua or ExactTarget or Pardot or whatever. But your CRM's not really. And so in this case, we need to manually get that from folks. And what I mean when I say it's not observable externally, that means that that information is pretty sparse in technographic databases. So like I think we're a Zoom Info and an Apollo customer for data, and so like the technographic piece of information like CRM that this account has is usually pretty low coverage there, again because it's not crawlable on the website.
Sure. They use like
And
built
so
with something, like
yeah, like with exactly built with and all these other guys, and also at this point I'm sure like Apollo and Zoom Info do it themselves. Yeah, like now if ICP for you just means like, hey, look, if the organization it has a size of this and like has this marketing automation software, well, marketing automation software is going to be externally available on someone's website. So as a result, that'll show up in Zoom Info's database or Apollo's database or whoever's database, right? So because of that, you'll be able to do automated form fills often. So like, hey, put your email address in here. Cool. We put in, Colin at orumhq.com. It does a quick lookup and it's like, oh, okay, cool. This guy works at Orum, right? And then Orum uses HubSpot or like Marketo or whatever, and it just fills the rest of the form. In our case, or not. In our case, we can't do that because the CRM, like we don't want to, the worst case scenario would be for an account executive to get on a call with somebody who like uses HubSpot as their CRM, right? It's like a waste of their time.
They can't be on HubSpot. They got to be on Salesforce. It's like you want to
ensure and so that exactly, and unfortunately that information is not in these technographic databases. So that's just the way to think about that. Is like if the information that indicates for you ideal customer profile can be present in a technographic or firmographic database, then you could potentially consider form fill automation. Otherwise, just figure out and actually you probably saw that on that Sales Nerd Hoodie landing page. We actually have an even though we could use organization size from a firmographic database, we actually ask how large their sales organization is because it's actually really important for us. Because you could have a very large organization, like let's say that you're like Instacart or whatever, right?
Product led or something, yeah.
You could have a very large organization but not have that many salespeople, and like in that case, like you still might not be qualified for us. And so that's why. So the thing to think about is, what are the pieces of information that are required that you can't get externally, and don't skimp on that, right? Yeah. So like in our case, it's CRM and size of the sales organization and phone number, right? Like those are really important pieces of information for us to get. And so like we don't want to have form fills that our SDRs are then like going and calling a bunch of people in order to be like, oh, I'm so glad I got you on the call. What CRM do you use? Oh, HubSpot? Great, click. Like that's just silly to like spend, even if the SDRs are parallel dialing all those folks, it's silly to put more more hay, right, in the stack to go through to find the needles there. So in that regard, like it's not like, yeah, form filling automation can be great. But only if you can get the information that is required out of a database.
I'll do one last question, Pete. That's awesome. Like, I agree. Like, pare down the form fill to what are your must-haves requirements for qualification versus like a laundry list there. So I think we want to take some questions from the audience here. Maybe while folks are filling out a poll, if they would like to get a demo of Orum's AI-powered live conversation platform. That's what Pete was referring to, being able to call all these marketing leads and follow up with the long tail of marketing leads, especially, right? And ensuring those tasks are not holding up the sequence when they come inbound. Marketing is not yelling at Pete, which is awesome. Please let us know, or also if you want a demo of Atrium as well. I know we want to learn about that here.
Let me share my screen. I'll give you a quick demo.
There you go. That's awesome. I'm curious, Pete. I remember an old MSP thread where you were talking about creating like a siren in the office. I don't know if you ever did this, for when an inbound came in, you wanted to like have it integrated to like a red alert, like whichever SDR gets the phone first gets it. I don't know if you ever went with that, or what do you?
Yeah, I never. Unfortunately,
when does it move to the next rep? Maybe real quick for the audience, how you think about that?
Yeah, we never. Unfortunately, we never got that going. But that was something that I always like. It was less around because like we use lean data for our lead routing, so like it would never be a situation where people were like like whoever gets to it first or whatever. But I did want to have something, and I never got around to doing it, where what people could do, like at least they could hear the hand raisings coming in, right? Cool. Just kind of like where it's like ding, 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 kind of like because like what when you close a deal, like you want to bang the gong or whatever, and like maybe that happens like every few days or once a week or whatever. Depending on the size of your sales organization. But then like, what are the precursors to that? Well, the precursors to that are going to be like getting people on the calendar. So just like, having that in the air so people could hear it was something that it was attractive to me. But unfortunately was never able to get it going.
Yeah, no, it's like that door chime when they're walking into the store, right? It's like, okay, you're hearing the business walk into the room or getting some sort of cue there. That's awesome. Yeah, questions from the audience here in our last bit of time here. Let's see, any Q&A from folks. Nathaniel says he'll give some follow-up.
Yeah, I think great session, guys. I'm not seeing any questions come in, which is totally fine. But yeah, any final thoughts we want to leave folks with?
I mean, I think the biggest thing I would just recommend folks to do is just like, sales leaders like to complain about the fact that the SDRs don't call or like aren't comfortable on the phone. And there's no better way of breaking that problem down than by jumping in with 2 feet on parallel dialing. And the easiest way to do that is in your inbound. Totally. Right. Like outbound calling is definitely the harder version of that, like valuable in its own right. But you have an entire marketing organization that's lined up around like getting forms filled, and like they want those people on the calendar. And so like the easiest, like even just taking a bunch of prior hand raisers, enriching that with like cell phone data, right, and like phone data, and then doing parallel dialing loops across that. I imagine that you guys probably like do that in as part of like your sales motion, Colin, and if not, maybe you guys could consider that, like just taking 1,000 former hand raisers, enriching them with call data, and then just like doing Orum loops across it. Like you'd be shocked that like the outputs that like there's gold in there, and then it's like, all right, cool. Well, now imagine like that these people didn't raise their hand and didn't get on the calendar, but instead our conversion rate on hand raise to meeting book is now wildly higher because of this. Like I just think that like for whatever reason, parallel dialing, people perceive it as more of an outbound thing, and like using it for inbound is just like a total no-brainer. And also it's like the easiest from a crawl, walk, run standpoint. It's totally just like crawling, and then you're like, oh man, like how, like what next can we do with our calling superpowers, right?
Yeah. I mean, Pete, you nailed it. Your reps are getting those conversations with people that actually want to talk with you, right? It's a great way to build up the muscle. Calling the hand raisers, getting used to qualifying, and getting those SDRs, especially that might be earlier in their sales journey, and having that business level conversation. They're able to start peeling back the onion on inbounds, people that want to talk with you. And then when you put those SDRs outbound, now they have the stories. They know why people are looking to solve these problems, and they can pair that up thoughtfully with the outbound evangelist type of sale, where they're out there evangelizing the business problems that your solution solves for. So Pete, I think that's great advice, right? Like, start off on the inbound. And by the way, your marketing team is going to love you. Your RevOps team is going to love you.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Because marketing has the biggest budget mostly in organizations, and proving the ROI on that investment, on the intent data, on the event spend, on all the Google paid and LinkedIn. They need to prove year over year that budget so sales can get fed. And this is getting your reps on the phone, getting into conversations, those marketing leads, a great way to make marketing happy, finance happy. And
I mean, if you're like an SDR leader and you're like excited about getting if you're excited about getting parallel dialing implemented, like you want to get Orum implemented, just think about it from the standpoint of like, hey, Ms. CMO, Mr. CMO, like I imagine you probably want the SDR team to call more of your leads, right? Yeah, it probably frustrates you that we're not able to call them more. Yeah, great. Here's a solution to that problem, right? I would imagine that, and then on the flip side, like, hey, Mr. or Ms. VP of sales, like it's frustrating to you that the SDRs don't call more, right? And like you want your AEs calendars like, more saturated, right? You want them filled. Great. Here you go, right? Like more meetings. So like those two stakeholders, like, calling first inbound motion, like scratches itches for both of those guys.
Yeah. Pete, it was awesome. You're a wealth of knowledge here. I know we could talk for days on end here. Laura, I'll let you wrap this up. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you both so much for all the expertise. Thanks everybody for joining us. I will be sending out the recording of this session if anybody on your team missed it, either today or Monday at the latest. And hopefully we'll see you next month for our next bold calling session. Again, thank you, Pete. Thank you, Colin, for all the knowledge and expertise. Have a great day, everybody.
Cool, guys. Yeah, take care.
Bye, all.
Thanks, guys. Happy Friday. Cheers.